On the stage we have Brian from BAE Systems, also chair of the Solar Freeport. We have Stuart Baker from Maritime UK Solent, also part of the Solar Cluster. Yes. Roy Haworth from Airbus. Tobias Marchant from Space South Central, and then Ben from Future Worlds. So to start, I'd like to ask each of you, why do you think the respective industries that you're working in are choosing to base themselves on the South Coast, and how does that compare to the rest of the UK?
Shall I go first?
Stuart, go.
Is this working? Yeah. Stuart Baker, Managing Director of Maritime UK Solent and Executive Director of the Solent Cluster. So with my maritime hat on, it's probably best to answer that question. This part of the South Coast, the central part of the South Coast, so Portland in the west, Chichester in the east, is quite phenomenal in relation to maritime. It's got a global footprint. There's excellence here that is, most areas of the world would think actually really independent, flag around for being quite exceptional. The value of that economy, we've just done some work, some independent work, that's looked to try and identify what the value of that economic footprint is. And the figure that's coming up at the moment, take a little bit of caution, because we have a little bit of work, it's around £10.3 billion. So when you consider that the value of that total economy is probably around £40 billion, you're looking at about a quarter of the economy you can trace back to the maritime sector in some way. So that's quite exceptional. And it shows that it has a significant impact on the area. So why is that happening? I think there's clearly a heritage here in terms of the history. This is a coastal region, probably about 500 kilometres of coastline from that port to Chichester, including obviously around the Isle of Wight as well. So there's that heritage, but I think that's grown over the years, and I think the title of this session is resilience and innovation, and I think you can't stand still in any sector, but maritime, the area just hasn't stood still. It's always innovating. We've got great people on the panel who their businesses are innovating at the highest level. We've got SMEs and micros innovating as well, doing some phenomenal things. I'm in a really lucky position. I get to go around and see some amazing things, and there's things happening in workshops in the New Forest that are just world leading, and it's just like, wow, it just blows your mind, and it's one of the challenges is actually how do we scale them up and how do we provide the space, the property market to provide the space to enable them to actually flourish here in the zone and provide jobs to people locally, provide jobs particularly for young people in the cities. You don't have to look behind the Kingston stand there to see some really challenged communities, people that should be having jobs in this amazing sector here.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, totally, we can't not use the word innovation and come to you, but there's a link here about the space sector here at South Central.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for the space sector. We're really seeing a boom in the industry, but with such a radical change brings some challenges.
Yeah.
Space is ubiquitous with this region. The Space South Central covers Hampshire and Surrey, and there are no clusters around us, so we theoretically are supposed to cover larger areas, or could cover larger areas.
But you can do that from space, right? That's the whole
If space could duplicate me, that would make life a lot easier. But yeah, Surrey and Hampshire account for 20% of the UK space economy. We're really lucky to have multiple primes in this area as well. Airbus, BAE, Serco, DSTL, all headquartered in this region. Well, that's at Stevenage. It's a real focus point for international interest. But as well as that, space is a really underpinning market, and so you go out and talk to people about why they would potentially want to be in this area, and it is because of the links with maritime, it is because of the links with the defence sector, and the fact that we are so well joined up, we're so well coordinated, and the more we can highlight that and try and tie space to these other associated sectors, the more exciting things we'll be able to do, and the more interest we'll attract.
Roy, because you're from Airbus, and you're into a lot of digital realisation of things and the front end of stuff, you have a big interest in the space sector as well. It's part of your...
Yeah, so most people know Airbus for commercial aircraft, and our activities in the UK are based in Bristol and in Broughton near Chester in North Wales. But we also have defence and space activities, and they are more focused here in the south. So in Portsmouth, we have a factory employing about 1,000 people, and we're building payloads for communication satellites, meteorological and observation instruments, and we also have a pretty huge activity supporting the military with secure comms, both on the ground and from space. So, to go back to Nella's question, why would we be here? Our heritage comes from the defence industry. That's where the money came from originally. We've been on site in Portsmouth since 1962. Back then, it was pretty much 100% government funded. We then evolved and we've got more involved in commercial and institutional satellites and grown. So the activities are twice or three times what they were. And it's the links, as Toby said, to all those other industries. So we've got links to defence, we link ourselves to maritime, every Royal Navy ship has one of our satellite terminals on it, and we can also link ourselves to the green economy. All of the data that people use to look at the world and the world's health and green issues, I would say probably 80% of that comes from satellites.
Yeah.
So it's this cross-sector that reinforces. But the reason we're here is history. But what we're doing is we're trying to encourage those SMEs to develop closer to us. We have a very wide supply chain, but we want more and more smaller companies working with us and closer to us.
The reason we're here is history. A couple of you said that. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, I was thinking, Nella, we come to Ben Bass, because he's got my buzzword in his very job, future.
Yeah.
But you said, talking about future and history, that you think that you guys look like a boy band. You are about the right age to take that.
Yeah.
But you're definitely looking forward, because it's not simply that you're connected to the naval part, and very linked there with Roy, with your work, but also you chair this is the thing we probably want to talk about, right? You chair the Freeport for Solar.
Yes, I do. And that has created, we're now, I think, 440 hectares of development space in the central south area. So a whole lot of it's up onto Waterside, the north end of the airport, and Dunsbury Park. And that gives development in those areas some quite significant tax breaks. Slightly better, actually, after the budget, because of the national insurance break gets even better. And we're seeing people move into them. I was interested to listen to the earlier presentation. I was at the airport yesterday and talking about the amount of land they're freeing up there. There's about 100 acres there. They're looking at office space, which could be really quite significant in the area. And the Freeport, I think, is going to get money from the government, which is going to allow us to open some of these areas up. Because it's not that we don't, everyone in this room knows those places are being developing, but everyone knows there's problems in the A326 on the waterside, the road access into the top end of the airport. Dunsbury Park's a bit up and going anyway, but hopefully the Freeport completes on those things. If you give me 1 second, I'm going to answer Nella's original question. Lovely, I was listening to the other panels, and if I was to answer my BAE hat, I mean, we employ about 4,000 people in this region, which I say, I'm not going to try and make a pitch for that we're important, but it gives you a sense of scale. But we also do lots of studies with the government about what impact it has. And it's estimated that everyone employed at a company like BAE, and I suspect Roy would say the same for Airbus, employs about 3 direct people in the supply chain, about 6 indirect, which gives you the sense of the impact it has on the area. But what the panel have just said, I think we're here at BAE for history, because people have been doing warships here for quite a long time. We're here for location, because you can't put a carrier to sea, an aircraft carrier to sea, except next to the sea. But also
Wise words.
yeah, but also crucially skills. There are skills built up over generations in this area, and I think Roy would say the same. Few people know that the world's best radars are built just behind the Cats on the Isle of Wight, and it has been like that for about since the Second World War. Few people realise that on top of that rather ugly superstructure on Portsdown Hill, which is us and Kinetic and the Navy, is what turns our warships and things that float about to actually a capability to fight. And that resource has been there since that land was actually compulsory purchase in the First World War. So we're here for those three things. It's skills, location, and history.
We're talking about, I don't know what your take on that is now, but we are talking about a lot of heritage in order to look forward. This is a future-facing pamphlet, stepping out of the normal run of business, all those numbers and graphs of how we're going to manage, just keep doing what we do. You guys have stepped out, your business is to step out of the normal run of things and look forward. Interestingly, you've got so many roots here in doing that. What do you think we talk to Ben now about that?
Yeah,
Ben?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think also one of the key things is to understand, okay, what are we lacking? How do we create that cluster? And how can the built environment help you create that economy and that ripple effect? So it'd be really interesting to understand in terms of the facilities and infrastructure, what do you need us to help you do?
Yeah, it's an interesting business. So Ben Clarke, Director of Future World. So we are the on-campus startup accelerator at the University of Southampton. So we are sector agnostic, technology agnostic, but we are working with the incredible and world-leading researchers and students in the university to help them turn breakthroughs in the lab into startups that can change the world. And so in terms of scale, the university has about 25,000 students and around about 5,000 staff. The engineering and physical sciences faculty, which I'm a part of, has around 2,000 staff, around 8,000 students. It's the largest engineering and physical sciences faculty across those disciplines in the UK. And it has a heritage of not just sitting in an academic ivory tower, but turning those breakthroughs into technologies that are deployed, from the fibre optic amplifier that has enabled long-range fibre optic communication, changed the way that broadband is delivered into our houses. It enabled the internet to happen from a hardware level. And so that heritage of application has drawn talent into the region down through the years. And the reason that the people that turned into startups further down the line came was the facilities and it was the talent here in the heart of Southampton. It's often unseen. The challenge for them is then, well, once they've got that, and once they've got the product, where does it go? And the thing that keeps them in the region is the factors of, yes, space, but also customers, also investors, an ecosystem that is enabling them to then move from the first ideas into how do I actually get products sold into a customer. And so you talked about recruiting talent, you talked about engagement with perhaps smaller businesses. They might be starting in university, but they need the big customers that are on the doorstep to be able to get rooted. And so thinking in terms of maybe space for startups, I think is often the wrong place to start. There's actually space for the large corporates that can come in at scale and can be recruiting 1,000 people that are not only driving jobs into the region, but also driving a demand for supplies, like you say, 6 million supply base.
So like an innovation quarter campus style feeling where you think about many businesses struggle with the war for talent because the notion of working from anywhere. And again, Toby, we've had quite a few conversations that you're going to Japan and Europe and you're speaking to all these companies and you're trying to get them to the UK, particularly obviously Hampshire and Surrey, but then you're then struggling, where do I place them? So what do they want? What do we need to do?
So it's a really interesting challenge within the space sector because the different companies can want very, very different things. It's a really broad church of industry from upstream geospatial, where it's literally access to computer and software talent, through to launch facilities and you know, people making rockets are going to need a much larger facility, right, than somebody who's tapping away on a computer. And so you have to be flexible in terms of those needs. A lot of the capabilities that are available in the UK are national level facilities, and we have to look outside of our own nation for what facilities we're missing. Mm-hmm. There's a challenge in Europe around kind of cutting edge facilities. We should really be looking at America and emulating some of their facilities, because we will then attract European business as well as Indo-Pacific businesses.
What models are you thinking of in America?
So, well, you know, the venture capitalist model is really interesting over there in comparison to our own. That would be a whole piece to educate on there. But almost their test facilities are a bigger scale.
They do a lot of modular-based testing as well, so you can chop and change between businesses. But one of the things we're looking as a cluster is how that we can get shared access to facilities. We want to ensure that businesses are using the most cutting-edge manufacturing techniques, but you will talk to an SME and they will have a contract to supply componentry, FPGAs to Airbus or BAE, and buying the cutting edge technology will complete that work in a few weeks. So they're then like, oh, well, actually, there's no point in me spending all of that money when the contract will suddenly be over very quickly. But actually, if they have affordable access to that equipment and could go, cool, that contract's done, I can concentrate on the next one, it will make the lives of our primes much, much easier, but it'll also make those businesses be able to be a bit more agile, a bit more flexible. And it'll then get to the point where once they start using that and trying to book it out for 6 months, you can be like, well, you've now got enough business that you can justify buying this equipment yourself.
Yeah, right. So that I can see why you're nodding about there. There's a flow through there, and as you're saying, Nella, that's really implying that we need to think sort of bigger on our innovation hub thinking.
Absolutely, certainly from a university perspective, we have huge facilities. We have a £180 million clean room facility, the largest university-based clean room in Europe. There is an increasing drive to see those facilities used not just for research, but also for applications. So giving access to companies to use those facilities and support with the technical expertise to turn products into market. And the opportunity to collaborate, whether it's with SMEs or large corporates, to say, okay, how could this facility be used to turn prototypes to test the market and get moving? But how do we, as a region, collaborate and say, okay, where's the semiconductor market going? What are the facilities that will be at the front edge of that? How can we come together to draw down government funding to build the facilities that will build the future?
Yes, the semiconductors may be forever getting smaller, but the space to build them will be more of it. Stuart, I was thinking that talking of big, the maritime solar cluster, biggest in the country, busiest stretch of water in the world, whatever it is that you symbolically sit on. What are your property needs here? What do you think investors are? What's the blockages from your point of view here?
It's fascinating listening to Toby for the space sector, because we hear that from the maritime sector, so that's very contract driven.
Yeah.
And so it's a big investment to sort of get your hoist dock or whatever for a particular project. Whereas if there's shared space, workshop space, that makes it more convenient. And that's ever since this, probably the last one, when you were sort of working back, that's something we've heard for probably the last 15 years. But nothing changes. It's really, really challenging. And I think to think about the assets we have in the area, it's not just in the universities, which are quite exceptional, particularly University of Southampton, but even in the industrial base as well. Kinetic facilities, Stephen Gospel, BAE will have facilities there, must have facilities. It's actually is there a way of opening up for the smaller businesses, micros, with their ideas to test them? It's so difficult. The MOD, there's so much MOD land in this area that could be better utilised as well. And there's that expertise. How do you bring that together? I think it comes back to collaboration, where innovation spaces in terms of property are really, really important. But they're really, really challenging because I've been to a number of maritime innovation spaces in different parts of the world. I'm really lucky to be able to go into them. But they all have the same, they're kind of rattling around. They're not busy places. And I think it's almost as though it's a public good. You need to sometimes accept that actually they're not going to be fully utilised all the time. But actually that collaboration is key. We've seen that hugely in this part of the world. When we bring maritime businesses together and that cross-pollination from other sectors, particularly, we're talking about space here, because one of the strengths in this area of maritime is connected maritime and autonomous maritime. Well, you need satellites for that, so space sector becomes critical. So it's not just looking within your own sector when you bring people together, but actually bringing others in. And sometimes you get that serendipity, don't you, of things that actually in a completely different sector, the creative sector, looking at completely different ways, different minds approaching challenges, but bringing people together has been key. And through some of the work that we've done at Maritime UK Solar, in terms of government funding, particularly on the innovation side and clean maritime side, we've been able to evidence that by bringing those people together, suddenly those sparks of innovation and collaboration happen that you wouldn't have seen happening before. And this area has been able to bring in more money from those government funds than any other area in the last two two rounds.
I think you'll find you're talking about cognitive diversity there, my friend. And in bringing people together the way you have, look at the symbolism of what these guys represent that you've brought together. You're very simply trying to illustrate that point, aren't you? That
Exactly.
by crossing sectors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in terms of the South Coast show, it's all about hearing from different people's perspective so that we can respond. Because ultimately, a lot of the landlords, investors that we have in the room, they are building spec builds and they don't know who their end user is. So if we can actually flip the narrative and actually focus on going, okay, if your business sectors are growing, what can we do to help you? You're saying, right, we need to create collaboration space. And I know ABP have got a roundtable discussion, Talbot have got their discussions, where we've got facilities, you've got connecting to the universities. How do you create that partnership agreement? And it's getting you guys to say, okay, right, you're going to build a spec build. Nella, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And that's what I need you guys to showcase to everyone in the room, to say, where are the challenges and where are the opportunities? Right.
I was going to say, you talk about channels, because it was interesting as Stuart there about maritime relation. Completely agree. But one of the challenges we've got in this area, I'm sure you all know better than me, is the ability to get any large-scale land together. The thing that almost stopped us having a Freeport was the government wanted any area to have at least 450 hectares. And to put that together within a 45-kilometre radius, which was the rules, we had to get 9 different landowners to pitch in different plots of land to get them to do it. And if you juxtapose that against somewhere like Teesside, which has just got one great big plot, it's a real stark contrast. And at the other end of the green economy, those of you who watched the news this week will have seen the Prime Minister announced that new wind turbine factory that's going in on Humber. 1,300 jobs, billion investment. The stark reality is that we probably couldn't have found anywhere to put that here. If that particular company, now it also is true that the wind turbines tend to be in the North Sea, so it's easier to make them on that east coast.
Plus, Siemens are already there, aren't they? And the Humber's big.
But I go back to the point, if somebody had come to us and said, we want to put this here, where can you put it? As a group here, we'd have found it really difficult to find anywhere to base it in. So, and going back to the early days of when I worked with Stu on the Marine Maritime Steering Group, that was one of our first early findings, just its big industrial maritime space available.
But you had to negotiate then an interesting test case of all the different landowners. You had to somehow get to work together. How did you tell that story and get them to go, yeah, we're in?
I think the flip side of that story is people are enthused. I mean, it's 9 landowners and 4 different rating authorities, and we've persuaded to sign a collaborative deal to work together. And generally, the landowners are very keen. I mean, you mentioned ABP now, and I know they're here. That's the other thing going on here, which is both pressure on space, but fabulous. The Chancellor talks about growth, and she means export. What she actually means is we're going to have to export it from this region, because this is by far the biggest export port, not Felixstowe, it's Southampton. And so ABP are under huge pressure in terms of space and land, at the same time as we want to bring other users into that land. So I think, I was looking at the graphs earlier, my sense of what we do in the Freeport is that people would like this land if we could free it up, and I think that's why the Freeport, freeing up some of the bits that have been unusable with infrastructure issues, is quite good for the region.
Yeah, that's a big symbolic shift going on along that side of the Roy, infrastructure is such a massive part of Airbus, but vision, this is a time of vision, and you in the digital sector helping people realise new tools. How are you finding, what's your response to this sense of bigger vision for things and how to bring people together?
Just picking up on people are talking about clusters. We talk a lot about clusters with the idea that you bring companies together. We're trying to do that at our level, encouraging. We have an initiative called Community for Space Prosperity, where we're trying to help SMEs or one-man bands who have an idea and how do they develop it. But one of the gems, I would say, is certainly just outside this region, but if you want to go and look at how clusters work, go up the A34 to Harwell, and they started, I think it was about 15 years ago, with a space technology hub. They had lots of land, lots of land that nobody wanted because it was the UK Atomic Energy Authority's land, with some.
No thanks, I think we'll leave that. Expensive surveys.
But basically, they started out with the space sector. They've now got a space cluster. They've now got an energy cluster. They've got a quantum computing cluster. They've got a what's the other one? Tony, you must know.
In my competition, right? So I'm not.
but that is an excellent example. There's I think there's now 5 different clusters, all in different. One's around viral research, the medical viral research. So I think if we can find something, I don't think it'll end up being as big as Haworth, but if we can find that space, or find a way to link all these different industries, it will really help. I mean, for us, looking forward is a lot more about as you say, the data. I'm involved in, as Toby explained, we talk about the space industry as upstream and downstream. Very simply, upstream is where you're building something that either launches satellites or is a satellite. Downstream is where you're using the data that's coming from satellites. And if you're not aware, the volumes of data are enormous. So each Earth observation satellite is going around the Earth about anywhere between 17 and 25 times a day. Each orbit, it gathers about a terabyte of data, and there are hundreds of satellites. So the volume of data coming down is enormous. And what we can do with that can support a lot of activity. And actually, the people who are manipulating that data, all they really need are some really good internet connections and good flexible office space.
So it comes down to that. Great internet
A good
connection.
use case as well is the other thing that I think all of my friends in downstream would say, right? If they get a good use case, you could be amazed by what they could do. And I think the people in this room could probably give incredible use cases of what they could use that data for.
Picking up on the use case point, you were talking about spec builds, and one of the things we constantly bang our innovators over the head with is saying, well, who's the customer and what is their need, what is their use case? Because it's easy to have a solution and you cannot find a problem to solve. And I suppose a spec build is an example of I've got a solution, I can build something, but who wants it? And as a region, how much can we be driving to be creating demand or identifying demand that would then pull through so that there's far less spec build and far more building to spec. So talk about data. One of the hidden sides of the revolution that's going on in AI at the moment is the enormous need for data centers and just staggering scale and quantity that is required. Is there an opportunity locally, regionally, to be diving into what can we be doing to be building infrastructure to process data at a hardware level that would create huge amounts of built environment requirements? But I was also thinking it's a bit like building a shopping mall. You'd never build a shopping mall without your anchor stores that are going to draw the audience. And I think often innovation sectors, like Stu, you're saying, often they can rattle a little bit. Like, don't build an innovation district without your anchor stores that are going to be drawing customer base so that then the SMEs that are wanting to launch in there have got that ready-made audience.
Yeah, and that's the problem with the property sector, because data centers is great. We can make the numbers stack up in terms of viability, but then planning. How many people do you employ for a data center? And then you you need that to support the infrastructure and the wider cluster, but then planning then comes on top of it and says, actually, you're not employing enough people. So again, it's trying to strike that balance. So there's quite a lot of council members in the room today, and it's trying to educate them, no offence, that obviously to make a development viable, there are some things that are not necessarily going to be profitable, or you're going to have to take a cut in some sense.
I think that's the point about the cross-sector view.
Yeah.
If you just look at data centres in isolation, then no, they don't. But what they do is they support a huge number of jobs that are related to those data centres. So if that's the message we need to get over to the planning authorities is look more holistically across the sectors, rather than just saying it's maritime, or it's space, it's defence. Look at everything.
Yeah.
And is that the secret to resilience? We've got the word resilience as the very first word in our panel here. It's that slightly fuzzier logic of bleeding out the normal boxes and spreading risk, spreading investment, spreading the way we cost out units so that things can be a bit more room to breathe. Is that how we get resilient? That's a more sustainable sounding model to me in every sense.
Yeah, I think that, the whole point of innovation is it creates things you've not thought of.
Yeah.
So
They won't like that. Nobody really wants that though, do they? It sounds great in a panel, but business leaders want certainty, man. You're talking about building relationships that we haven't done before.
I was going to make one comment. I think everyone here is aware of it, but we haven't mentioned on the panel is power and electricity for this region.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned data centres. They're hugely power hungry. We're massively short of power already. I mean, in my BA hat, with the Navy, we're having to build a power station in the naval base to power the aircraft carriers when they're in port, because there isn't enough power in southern England to power. And ABP, when they've got one cruise ship in, they can power it from shore power now. But what's stopping them powering all of them is not a reluctance on their part to put in shore power facilities, it's lack of power.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you were talking about educating people. My biggest frustration when I talk to people who aren't close to this is people say things like, well, can't they just put solar panels on the roof of the office? And people just don't get a sense of the magnitude of power. So you've got 6 cruise ships in Southampton, more power than the rest of Southampton is what they need when you've got 6 of them now.
Yeah.
To give a sense of the scale.
It's not just plugging in on a pontoon, is it?
No, we're doing national acquisitions throughout the UK, and power is a big issue. And again, with ESG, in terms of being sustainable, a lot of landlords are saying you can't have gas supply. And every new build that's being bought through, the capacities are much lower as well. But then, like you say, there's not enough infrastructure to actually charge all these electric cars or turn on the lights.
And just as an ex-engineer, and the other thing people talk about is hydrogen. That's going to solve it. But there's 2 ways to make it. You either take hydrocarbons and crack it, and then you've got to get rid of the carbon, which is what Exxon was suggesting with that pipeline through the New Forest to the Isle of Wight. Not terribly popular, I suspect. And the second way is green electricity, which is green hydrogen, which needs electricity. So it doesn't really, hydrogen is just a way of transporting power around. It doesn't get around your need to have electricity to make it in the first place.
And obviously it's very tricky fuel to transport. Right? We know that from the Ariane launch. It'll leak from everything ever.
Don't mention the Ariane launch.
I was assuming you'd innovate at the end of the panel.
Do our best.
Have I got an innovation?
Before I visit, I could talk to these guys all day because I've got an interest. But is there anyone from the audience that has any burning questions? Any ideas of actually how can we create these clusters, land that we can actually see if it actually works? Nobody?
Perhaps while someone's thinking of a question,
Yeah.
I think on the point of resilience, from my perspective, diversity is absolutely key for resilience, because the reality is no one knows where the economy is really going to go. No one knows really what technologies are going to win out, what sectors are going to win out. The process of creative destruction that powers the startup ecosystem is one of disruption, and it is one of change. And you look back sort of 25 years, and IBM, such a big driver of the economy in this region, with Hursley, with down in Portsmouth as well. Their market cap in 1999 would have been, what was it, about 100 billion or something. Massively eclipsed Apple. They were got 16, 15 billion at that time. Over that 25 years, IBM has roughly doubled in market cap, and Apple has a multiple of about 200, more than $3 trillion valuation. No one would have predicted that when they launched the iMac G3 in '98 that revolutionised every design agency in the country that had their nice purple desktops. But how do we build an ecosystem that will attract in that diversity of existing corporations and new corporations, so that whichever ones win, we're selling spades to the ones who are going to find gold?
Well, and I think whilst the sort of secret hope of investors is always that something will leap out of an innovation zone that is the next G3 processor or whatever it is, that step change or a big boost. Actually, the resilience, the strength is in being able to keep going no matter what the market's doing. And that's got to be in relationships. You guys have used some very emotive language quite casually. When you're talking about technology and innovation and forward-looking stuff, you actually talked about community and roots and heritage and the truth of being somewhere, the history of places. That idea of community is a very sustainable view. And I think you're talking about, well, I'm a creative that's interested in how we step out of the day-to-day and actually think about future stuff. I know this, that vision is what gives you courage when things seem really uncertain. But when you're in a squad and you've got a diverse range of perspectives all in that squad with trusting relationships, that's the human shit that actually makes things strong. And I think when you guys have an energy about you, when you talk about your stuff, because you can see a place to go, you can see new ways of doing things. That's the resilience, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. So I guess in terms to wrap up then, so what is the single most important thing that can enhance our position to be the leading defence, maritime, tech on the South Coast?
Can I? So there's an interesting point in the Chartered's presentation earlier today, which was that new builds are selling more than 10, 20-year-old buildings because of heat loss and energy conservation. Well, there's a facility, SatView, that mapping heat loss for buildings. You could be using this technology in space, and by doing so, by helping us pioneer future space technologies in the property development and maritime sectors, that will bring more interest in. So actually, it doesn't take a massive revolution. What it takes is us joining that conversation together and finding out what we could do. It's funded. ESA will fund an idea around downstream application if we have a solid use case. If it is a case of, I want to map which properties I have are losing the most heat. I want to look at property, a population migration over the area so I can see where it's going to be a good place for a shopping centre, or where it's going to be a challenge of a future housing development. We already know that this area has got a real issue in terms of commuting, but because you've got that geospatial data that Roy was talking about earlier, I can prove the challenges, or I can justify the expense. And almost as we were talking about as well, about the use case of why you would build something, you've got that answer. And that interest, that change will draw people here. So, we're working already with Maritime Solar. I think, we've got a globally recognised maritime area, a globally recognised space sector. We should be joining the dots so that more people are interested in coming to us to ask how we're doing it.
Well, luckily, you have 35 panels to go and listen to understand what are the key challenges from residential, construction, housing, commercial. So do stay around and actually dive into that.
No, I think just one more thing that we've not mentioned in terms of resilience, and answer to your question, is skills and young people as well. And we talked about diversity and making sure there's opportunities for all of our communities to get involved in the sectors that we've got here. New ways of thinking, new minds, and my sons are sort of far more digitally enabled than me, but they interact with technology different to what I ever would have done because they've grown up in a different era. I'm sure that's all the same, and that will keep changing. But how do we, if we're thinking about the property market, I'm trying to think, how can that happen? Well, a lot of the real clever stuff that happens in the region or anywhere is behind a big fence that you just can't get to, and you don't really know what's going on. I think we all know the stories around kids in communities in this area have never even seen the sea, despite they live in a port city, which is tragic. But that's because it happens behind a fence, and so they don't really know. So their horizons in terms of what they can do and what's open to them as well. And that goes to the diversity piece, in terms of ethnicity, but also gender as well. So how do we perhaps bake opening up property and opportunity to young people as well, so they can see what's going in and broaden their minds?
And picking up on your point about vision, I think something we can do collectively is vision and mindset in particular. So we take a cohort of our startups out to Silicon Valley every year to expose them to the radically different mindset and ecosystem that is there. And I would characterize it as one where the people that they meet, whether they're corporate potential customers, partners, investors, is ones that ask why not rather than here, typically, it's why would you do that rather than why not? And this much more aspirational, risk appetite, ambitious, take this to global scale perspective is infectious, and it keeps people in a region, it draws people to a region, and it emboldens people to go on a journey that can make a difference.
And my quick summary would be, and it's very, I think, relevant today, is to get those young human skills here, it's the built environment. People need to live and want to live and work in this region.
Yes.
And actually, truthfully, at the moment, not many people do, because of all sorts of factors about you get off the train in Southampton, doesn't look that great. People think the New Forest's kind of stuck in the past, the Isle of Wight's 1950s, but we don't have a brand here, and you don't find young people aspiring to live and work here, typically. And that would be true at the university, I think. I think it's a statistic about less than 10% of the students staying and live and work in this area.
Yeah, that's similar across in the BCP area, Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole area as well. The retention's a tricky thing. Great talent comes out of the universities there as well. But in linking together and holding space across sectors, space not being a pun, this is actually also about placemaking. So the relationships, the implication there is you don't just put a single use stick in. I can recommend you come to the Talbot Village Trust talk very shortly, which is talking about exactly the sort of thing in exemplar, isn't it?
Exactly.
And Roy, what would you say?
So I can't leave without talking about the government. So we spend a lot of time lobbying with the government, looking not just for money, but for strategy. Various governments talk about industrial strategies, and then they start talking about current industries or industries that maybe are struggling. I think what we need is a government digital strategy that focuses on what the future could look like, not how do we preserve all the industries that we've currently got. Some we'll keep, some we won't, but there's lots of new industries that if we don't have a strategy that focuses on them, they won't grow to the level they could.
I think if you guys all turn up at Westminster as a phalanx and put together your worlds and say, here's our pitch, you'll be illustrating it really well just by standing next to each other.
Wow, I think that's been really exciting. That is the end of our session. Thank you so much for joining us today and just sharing your knowledge. I know that most of you will be sticking around and joining a lot of these discussions, and we just want to learn. So thank you. Massive round of applause. And so thank you so much. We're going to round this off with Peter Taylor, who's basically going to wrap up, he is here, on how we're actually going to unlock the South Coast. Thank you so much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for staying. I'm going to try and do a very whistle-stop tour through what I see as the opportunities, the massive opportunities that we've got for this region. So start with what does the data tell us about the region at the moment? Then we're going to look at the strategy for success, for skills and sustainability, which is building on what you've just heard from the panel. The global opportunities I want to spend a bit of time talking about, and then just some personal reflections on the budget. But what does the data currently tell us? How many registered businesses do you think there are in Hampshire? Anyone have a guess? In Hampshire? 114,000. And in the Solent region, we've got 42,000 businesses, a thriving economy. In terms of sector breakdown, we've got wholesale and retail, and they will have their challenges, as we will explore a bit later on. Human health and social work, a huge amount of jobs in the county in that sector, over 10%. Manufacturing, as you've heard recently in the panel, advanced manufacturing, technology is booming. Professional scientific and technical services, and then you've got the accommodation, the food services, the hospitality sector. and then education all play a key part in the economic matrix and breakdown of this particular region. Some more data, very briefly. Central South population, 28 million. 78% are economically active. As a county, Hampshire contributes 50 billion to the GVA of the UK. Southampton is 10 billion, and the entire South East region is 318 billion. We're in the port of Southampton, and these numbers are just absolutely staggering to me. 900,000 vehicle movements every year. 40 billion pounds worth of exports come through this port. Over 2 million cruise ship passengers come through Southampton. 460 cruise ship calls, each with their own challenges, but each with their creating job opportunities in the region. The port handles in excess of 1.8 million TEUs per annum and contributes itself 2.5 billion to the economy. So we should be holding our heads up and be proud. And if there is one thing that I feel in the past, particularly about the region, is that we are apologetic. I heard many years ago people saying, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I only come from Southampton. We shouldn't be that. We should be proud and stand proud that we live and work and play in this region. So in terms of where I think we should go and what I think we should do in terms of developing on the opportunities that we have, we need to build a strategy. We need to build a clear strategic narrative to be really clear as to what we are saying this region stands for. Maritime, space, technology, creative sector, being clear so that anybody who wants to come and invest and play in our area understands what they're getting involved in. A voice that is shared by all stakeholders and to which business can subscribe, investors and aspiring entrepreneurs can link into, they can understand, they feel relevant and communicate it for themselves. Being really clear about what our USP is. I was on a call the other day to an international contact who has a great interest in investing in this area and was posing the question, are you really clear as a region as to what you stand for? They understand what the Northern Powerhouse stands for. They understand what the West Midlands stands for. We need to come together and be clear about what we stand for. And there is good work that is going on that. Since COVID, I am clear in my own mind that there is much greater collaboration and a shared willingness to have that single voice. But we've got more work to do on it. Skills. We have got 5 universities in the region building centres of excellence. We've got a much stronger college section and structure for further education. As we've heard only a few moments ago, the number of students in this region is astronomical, but we need to make sure that they feel the urge that they want to stay here rather than moving up the M3 or overseas. There is so much that we can do here. There has been much greater dialogue between employers and between those educational establishments. As Stuart said, looking at developing the skills of our young people is important. Equally, retraining some of the skilled and longer standing employees so that they have the skills for the future that we need for the future, particularly in this digital age. The Chamber of Commerce is playing its own part in terms of the development of the local skills improvement plans, and there is still great work going on. STEM subject development, the University Technical College in Portsmouth is looking to develop a similar institution in Southampton. The South Hampshire Technical College Group has come together, bringing together the skills of the various colleges in the south of Hampshire. And then we've got the Institute of Technology as well, which is in its early stages. Sustainability, Brian touched on the importance of energy resources, and there's staggering statistic if we had, I think, 2 or 3 cruise ships all seeking shore power. At the same time, the lights in Southampton would go out. Well, that's not sustainable for the long term. There's the issue around carbon capture and how we make sure that we ensure we've got that, and then measuring that carbon footprint so that as a region we are playing our part in working towards net zero. Global opportunities. This is something I'm really passionate about, and I have been past president of Chamber of Commerce for the past 3 years, but I'm staying with the Chamber of Commerce to try and see what we can do to build much stronger global opportunities. Historically, this part of the country has been really important for the UK PLC. And there are other parts of the world, particularly in this time of geopolitical unrest and unease, that are looking to forge relationships with the UK, and they see the place to do so is the Central South. Through the Port of Southampton, they see that as an international asset for the UK and a bridge between the UK and the rest of the world. We've got a national asset in Portsmouth, and in times where there is uncertainty and the risk of hostilities, then having the home of the Royal Navy is an important asset for us as our region to have. Now, if you think about that, those two assets, you've got the universities, you've got the talent that comes out of those universities. You can bet your bottom dollar that there are other parts of this country that say, "God, do you know what? I wish we were down there. I wish we had all the assets that you've got." So there are conversations that are taking place. There are opportunities for us to talk to other nation states. And I don't underplay this. There are opportunities for us to talk to other nation states who are very keen to diversify their economies, and they are under the umbrella of certain other nations that they would prefer not to be under the umbrella of, but looking to the UK as a place that they can advance their own economy. Now, if we listen and have and constructive dialogues as to how we can help them in their ambitions, actually that will in turn help us in building a much bigger economic region and a thriving region here. Central Asia is one. There are parts of Europe that are keen to start working much more closely through Southampton and the Central South. So communicating the benefits and thinking in a very open-minded way about how we can create a win-win situation for those international players as well as for our region will stand the test of time and will reap its rewards. I said I was going to end on some comments about the budget. I think the jury is still out as to how that will play out. There are clearly real challenges for businesses, particularly in the hospitality retail sector. You've actually had the triple whammy of the increase in the minimum wage, you've got the NICs, and then you've got the reduction in your discount on business rates. If I was being compassionate with the government, I would say they were trying to drive technological change and restructuring our business models. It's going to be very, very painful. But the one thing that we have as business owners throughout this region is a degree of resilience. We've got a degree of resilience, we've got a degree of understanding the benefits of working together, sharing experiences, and thinking collectively, thinking holistically as to how we can come through the current challenges to be stronger, more diverse, more sustainable for the future, and that will play well for our generations to come. So on that very quick whistle-stop tour, I hope I've kept to time for the boss.
Perfect.
But very happy to take any questions. In my book, no question is a bad question. So please feel free, if you want to ask me anything, please do. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.